All right, so here's the last part of this video. Talking about population, though, I want to get back to that. With an increase in population, we're going to see an increase in the needs for resources. So I think that's a quiz question. So it should seem kind of intuitive there. With more people, we're going to need more stuff. So let's talk about resource sustainability. Energy, that's going to be a big one. We've seen an increase in coal consumption. We're going to see an increase in coal consumption. We've seen an increase in renewable fuels, and we're expected to see a 3% yearly rise in renewable fuels versus other energy sources. All energy sources have increased since 1980. So when you see that renewable fuels are increasing, that doesn't mean that coal is decreasing. We have increased all energy sources since 1980, and they are predicted to continue to increase. So that's a quiz question as well. It's not just renewable sources. All energy sources are predicted to increase in the future. With more people, we just need more energy. So we've seen an increase in water needs as well. The U.S. uses about 408 billion gallons of water per day, and this was the EPA's calculation in 2007. So it's only gotten higher. Projections show that by 2025, 2 out of 3 people on Earth will suffer from water shortages. So this is when we're going to start seeing conflicts based on water. I believe right now around 60 to 70% of conflicts on this earth are due to water rights. By 2050, they're expected to be around 90%. So that's when stuff is really going to start hitting the fan, is 2050. Just be mindful of that. That's why we need to continue to be sustainable so we don't have to fight each other for water. Increased pollution and degradation of aquatic ecosystems are mainly to blame for this water shortage here. Because, like I said, if you degrade an aquatic ecosystem or pollute it, then it no longer becomes a renewable resource. It becomes a non-renewable resource, and you've essentially taken that amount of water out of the hydrologic cycle. So we really need to be cognizant about pollution and the degradation of aquatic ecosystems, but we also have to remember that recharge and discharge rate from streams, tributaries, and large bodies of water. If you discharge more than is being recharged, that whole area is going to see a depletion in water, and you're going to get that degradation of aquatic ecosystems. So that's how that happens. So we'll just talk very quickly about air quality. We've talked about it a lot previously, but you can see from about probably, I don't know, like 1890, right about here, you see a large uptick in emissions increases. So we've got carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. They all start to increase dramatically right around the Industrial Revolution, and this is where we're at right now. So we're right about there with nitrous oxide, and we're right about here with methane and carbon dioxide. So this is parts per million. ppm is parts per million, and nitrous oxide is parts per billion. So that's the same as methane. It's parts per billion. So when you did your climate change lab, I noticed a lot of you said that nitrous oxide or methane are the largest contributors. Those are parts per billion. So CO2 is parts per million. This amount right here is about 100 times more than this amount. So that's just something to think about. Maybe carbon dioxide is the worst emitter right now. But this is all going to contribute to smog and bad air quality. So like I've said in previous lectures, 2/6 of the world's deaths are due to pollution, and 2/3 of those 2/6 deaths are linked to air pollution. So that's just a whole bunch of people dying for essentially no reason because we can't regulate our emissions properly. So we'll get into agriculture and ecosystems. So our agricultural practices need to increase 2 to 3 times in the next 40 years to support those growing populations. That's by 2050. 35% of the land on the world is already devoted to agriculture. So imagine if we need to increase that 2 to 3 times, we're at around 100% of the land being devoted to agriculture, which is impossible. So we need to increase our technologies or our practices. Erosion, that's the big one. This is going to be a quiz question. Erosion is the number one damager to agricultural lands. It's going to increase with increases in agricultural land. So 33% of the United States and 20% of the Canadian cropland is threatened by erosion. These are things that can be disrupted or disruptive if you don't do anything about it. And that's why conservation tillage practices are very necessary. So we've got this thing called tolerable soil loss rate. And essentially this is the same thing as that recharge versus discharge water budget rate. It's just for soil. So it's the rate at which we can disrupt soil without causing catastrophic consequences in the future, because soil kind of recharges itself as well. It's got this soil cycle. But when we disrupt soil faster than it can renew itself, then that's when we get this soil loss, and we're at the intolerable rate right now. And here's another quiz question right here. 60% of ecosystems are used unsustainably in this world. 60%. So, you know, that 40% is probably not in the United States. It's in forms of like national parks, national monuments, wilderness areas, places that are protected where humans can't get in and really screw things up. So, you know, it's just something to think about. The whole world, 60% of the whole world is used unsustainably, and we've known this, and we are going to continue to know this. It only takes one person to make a change. And if you yourself start to make little changes like turning the faucet off or recycling glass, that makes a huge difference, like way more of a difference than you can ever imagine. So don't ever, ever, ever think that just because you're one person you can't make a difference. That's a load of malarkey. Tell that to Martin Luther King Jr., tell that to Gandhi, tell it to Jesus, you know, all those famous people that have survived the test of time. That was one person who made that difference. So you can do it. Don't feel like you can't. So let's get into the ecological footprint here. The ecological footprint is just a measure of the average amount of land and water needed to support a person in a particular area. So it's measured in global hectares, which this is just a measurement of land. And 1.8 global hectares of land and water are available per person on this earth. And the average person on earth consumes 2.2 global hectares. So we are living unsustainably. This number does not match this number, and it is not lower than this number. It's very simple. Here's just in 2003 our ecological footprint per person by country. So the United States is clearly the worst contributor to the ecological footprint. Per person in the United States, we attribute about roughly 10 global hectares per person is our ecological footprint. And then you get to places like Sierra Leone, Afghanistan, Egypt, Thailand, even China, because per person they have 1.5 billion people. They actually have a lot less of a carbon footprint per person than the United States does. We only have 300 million people, but we really screw up the environment very quickly. So that's that developed versus developing nations thing there. Normally developed nations have a much larger ecological footprint than developing nations, but the developing nations have more people. So one thing to think about with population growth is this ecological footprint. A lot of people will tell you we need less people. And yes, that's true, but the problem isn't the countries with the most people. The problem is the countries with less people that are developed, like the United States. We are the number one problem. We aren't very good to the environment. We're, you know, like 2 times as much global hectare for our ecological footprint than the second highest country. So just think about that. Just because a country has more people does not mean that they're the problem. We are the problem. When you hear people like blaming China or blaming India, it's just a load of malarkey. They actually are the number one contributors to trying to start up renewable energy resources. They know that the smog is a problem. They know that these are problems. They're trying to better themselves. We're just sitting in our you know, nice little golden throne up here, using the world away, basically. And we have hardly a significant population of people. We have 300 million people. That's not that many. So just think about that. That's for the future there. And then this is CO2 from fossil fuels here. Look at that. Like our CO2 from fossil fuels global footprint is more than most of these countries combined. So let's talk a little bit about African lake depletion, and I'm really just talking about Lake Chad. So it's affected by population growth, agriculture, and pollution. With rises in all of these things, you're going to see depletion in sources of surface freshwater. And 14 African countries suffer from lake depletion effects. That's countries. The United States is a country, all right? So 14 countries in Africa suffer from lake depletion. This isn't just states here. Like, this is an amazingly large problem for a lot of people. Lake Chad is a prime example. And a depletion of lake depletion leads to a depletion of aquatic life, like I said before, but it also decreases the economy, food, and available water. So most of these countries rely on that lake for like fishing or certain sorts of plants that they farm from the lake. But when the lake decreases, then those people are out of jobs. So there's less money into the system. The economy starts to go down. Available food starts to go down. Available water starts to go down. So this whole area is just living in a perpetual state of poverty, excuse me. So we need to try and think of ways to help them out, and people are. So that's a good thing. So here's just 1973. All the green, or all the blue is water, the green is vegetation. So this is 73. 10 years later, 1986, that's how much water is left. 1999, they got a little bit of a flood. They got more water in there. But here's 2013. After much reclamation, they've actually increased a little bit of the water supply, but they've also increased the amount of vegetation, converting that water area into like a vegetation zone. So that water is being sucked up there. Here's just another good graphic from 1963 to 2001. Just look at that. The green right there is vegetation, and this little tan area is where the lake used to be. And then here is where we are now, I believe. Yeah, so 1963 or 72 maybe. This is in the 70s. This is now. There's like no water. Here's the 50s. We had 24,000 square kilometers of water for this lake. And then by today, we've only got 1,300 square kilometers. So there's no outflow. The northern part of this lake is dry. It's pretty much a desert. It's got some vegetation in there as well. But this whole area is just basically destroyed. And it helps with Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, and I believe the Congo as well. So, that's 4 countries right there that are affected immensely by this lake depletion. And this happens here too. We have the Ogallala Aquifer, which has a depletion right now. We are looking at California, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, parts of Texas, Utah. All those places are serviced by the Colorado River watershed, which is fed by the Ogallala Aquifer, and we're discharging more than is being recharged. So this kind of action is happening in America as well, but it's underground water. And we have a lot more of it. But still, like, this is going to happen if we don't start thinking about sustainability a little bit. So that's going to be the last slide in this lecture. I know I said it was going to be short, but I ended up talking a lot. Either way, you learned. So let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Otherwise, have a wonderful week.